Alright, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to start this lesson off giving all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Hashem, Yahushai, Ba'ashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all the brothers who are fervently preaching the word in sincerity and in faith. Shalom to all the sincere, Akwa, and Shalom to the scattered Israelites who are amongst these other nations and look like these heathen nations. Now this lesson is going to be based on this refinery fire. So through the Spirit, I'm going to read this article, get some precepts, and Lord's will, you're edified. It says a fire at the largest of Australia's 2 oil refineries has hit petrol production, company and government officials said on Thursday, just as the nation faces pressure to shore up fuel security with the Iran war disrupting global supply. The state fire authorities said the blaze, which broke out at 120,000 barrels per day refinery run by Viva Energy on Wednesday night, had been brought under control at noon on Thursday. The fire came at a bad time for Australia, as it depends on imports for 80% of its fuel needs and has been racing to replace supply disrupted by the Middle East conflict, which has driven up energy prices worldwide. Said this is not a positive development, but obviously there's a long way to go in terms of working out just what the impact is, Energy Minister Chris Bowen told Channel 9. Viva Energy's refinery supplies over half of the fuel in Australia's second most populous state, Victoria, and a tenth of the country's total demand. The company said it expects output of petrol and aviation gasoline will be affected, but it will meet fuel demand through imports. The plant is still producing jet fuel and diesel, but at reduced levels for safety reasons, Bowen said. Said I would expect we'd see a price hike depending on the scale of the damage, and secondly, it reinforces the challenges we have in terms of sovereign and resilient capabilities here, Australian Strategic Policy Institute analyst John Quinn said the incident comes as Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visits Kuala Lumpur on Thursday to discuss securing fuel supplies with his Malaysian counterpart, Anwar Ibrahim, following similar trips to Singapore and Brunei. Malaysia and Brunei, which produce crude oil and refined products, could increase production, but only to a certain degree. Said no injuries have been reported from the fire at the refinery located about an hour's drive from Melbourne. The cause of the blaze and the extent of the damage was not immediately clear. So basically the Lord, used this fire to put more of a strain on those people out in Australia, because they're already strained because of the war. And then this fire, it just made things worse. It says in the nearly 7 weeks since the war began, supply fears have stoked panic buying, doubling demand for fuel in some areas, despite assurances from the government the market is well supplied. Last month, Albanese announced temporary relief measures, including halving the fuel excess and suspending the heavy road user charge for 3 months to help households cope with a surge in costs driven by the Iran war. It's going to be a very bumpy and expensive few months, said Tennant Reed, climate change and energy director at Australian Industries. In March, the government committed to underwriting a portion of fuel purchases by refiners and suppliers. We'll continue to work with the company to do what we can to make sure that anything that is offline is brought online as soon as possible, Albanese said at a media conference in Malaysia's administrative capital. So Reid said the government could go to market to secure more supply to make up for any loss of production at Viva's plant, but it would still take weeks for the cargoes to arrive. Viva Energy CEO Scott Wyatt told reporters the primary focus was to completely put out the fire that hit operations at 2 units at the refinery before assessing damage and safely restoring production. So all the other units are still operating and still in production, but they are at minimum rates to maintain safety across the site. We'll only start increasing production again once we're confident that we can do that safely. So Viva's shares were on a trading halt pending an update on the impact of the fire. Yeah, so things are definitely, getting more difficult, as a result of this war. In particular, when it comes to fuel. Psalms 9 and 16. The Lord Yahweh is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Hegion Selah. And this war is the judgment of the Lord, because we're seeing all the effects of this war. The fuel prices skyrocketing, grocery prices skyrocketing, people panic buying. These different governments, struggling to figure out a way to, keep supplies as far as fuel is concerned. Because the longer this war goes on, the more strain there will be on the fuel markets. So the Lord, with this one war, he has caused a lot of disruption in the world and in the economy. And then the fact that there was this fire, well, 2 fires at these oil refineries, that just made things worse for those people out there in Australia, as if they weren't going through enough. Isaiah 29 and 6, thou shalt be visited of the Lord Yahweh of hosts with thunder, and with earthquake, and great noise, with storm and tempest, and the flame of devouring fire. And that's what those fires at those oil refineries were. That was the Lord bringing judgment. And the men of the Lord have been saying that these judgments were going to get worse. And we're quite literally seeing it happen. 2 Ezra 8 and 50. For many great miseries shall be done to them that in the latter time shall dwell in the world, because they have walked in great pride. And anybody with eyes to see can see that that's what's happening. Due to this Iran war, everything is getting thrown out of whack. And it's hard for people who were already struggling before this war started. It's hard for them to cope because they were barely holding on as it is. The fuel prices are going up, grocery prices are going up, cost of living in general is going up, and people are, already scratching and clawing and, trying to find every shortcut that they can to try to make their life a little bit easier, but they can't keep up with all of this. If the fuel prices go up too high, these truck drivers, they're not going to be able to fill up their trucks. So then they're not going to be able to make any deliveries. When, if these, jet fuel, if that runs low, planes are not going anywhere. People who drive to work, they're not going to be able to do that if they can't afford gas. Buses won't be able to run. Like, everything is really going to shut down, because everything is too expensive and people can't afford it. So when it says in 2 Timothy 3:1, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. This is part of what that was referring to. Like the strain on these economies and the different parts of the economy. And the strain on the people as well. Because you have some people who trust in the government and they're like, oh, the government will figure it out. They'll balance it out. And then you have other people who, after a couple of days of, seeing the prices increase, people are just go crazy, start stealing from the stores, start siphoning gas, just trying to, like I said, trying to find any shortcut to get what they need. And it's just going to get worse. And there's nothing anybody can do to stop this because the Heavenly Father is the one who put it into motion. And there's nothing anybody can do to prevent the will of the Lord from coming to pass. So those of us of the hopeful elect, all we can do is, stay prayed up, continue to watch, continue to read, continue to fast, continue to stay circumspect. Because things are only going to get more hostile and volatile and chaotic from here. So in closing, I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushai, Bahashim, Rakakudash, the water Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahushai, for putting the spirit on me to do this lesson. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Honors to all the brothers who are fervently preaching the word in sincerity and in faith. Shalom to all the sincere believers. Hope you all stay strong, stay safe, stay fervent, stay circumspect, stay prayed up, and Adawan Ratazah. Till next time, Shalom.